Hello everyone, and this is my review for TNA Impact Wrestling on February 6, 2015, and this is their actual lockdown style show, which honestly, in my own personal opinion, is very weird for Impact Wrestling in this case, because usually they have this be one of their bigger pay-per-views for the year, and now they're basically giving it a week's worth of hype before they actually do their entire show with Inside the Six Sides of Steel, which, like I said, kind of comes off a little weird in my own personal taste. I felt like it could have been, they could have done a lot more with it if they decided to, you know, build and build and build, saying, oh, hey, lockdown's coming, instead of 1 week and now you have lockdown. But that's my own personal take on it. I'm not saying that the show was good or bad just based on how I felt like they maybe underbuilt the show, because the storylines themselves did really build themselves into these cage matches. I liked the beginning match with the Hardys and Storm and Abyss. Outside of the finish of the match, where they basically broke their traditional type of cage type rules, where no matter where usually what you see in any kind of cage match, it doesn't matter how you get out of the cage. That if you get out of the cage, you win the match, and that was the whole aspect on there. You could win by pinfall submission or one person getting out of the cage. So they had Matt Hardy get pulled out of the cage through like the camera hole, and they don't end the match in that case. That kind of breaks where they were going, and it just came off really. It came off not in a. It didn't come off with a lot of fluidity to it. I mean, yes, it was probably the right choice to keep the tag team titles at this point on Abyss and Storm, but the way they finished that match did not come off all that good, at least in my own personal take on it. Now, the spot afterwards with Jeff Hardy getting hit in the head with the cowbell off of the door of the cage, that was a sick spot, and also a good way to write him off, because he's not allowed out of the country at this point in time still to do the UK tours and everything. So it was definitely a really good, definitely a really sick looking spot, really dangerous looking. I really don't like it when they go that route, but they had to try to write them off in some way, so they went with a crazy looking spot. This brings it into the Awesome Kong Havoc match. You know, this is a very effective match. It was basically what you would figure two heavyweight guys would do, but you had it with the female division in this case, with Awesome Kong and Havoc. And honestly, it came off great. In my own personal opinion on this, I thought that match was actually a lot of fun to watch. It was, again, that entire feud between the two of them was a breath of fresh air for the women's type division. Now, it felt like this was kind of like the blow-off to this one, so hopefully there's something down the road for it, but I'm thinking Havoc's not going to be within TNA because she has been doing a lot of independence, and now TNA's kind of gone on this whole, you know, lockdown of their guys. They don't necessarily let them do the independent circuits all that much, so more than likely that feud did come to an end in this case. But hey, honestly, you got a good match out of it, and you got a really good storyline out of it, at least in my own, again, in my own personal opinion. The Bobby Roode Eric Young match was a relatively good match. It told the story, and this was the one thing that I liked about the show. Pretty much the entire thing, the entire premise, and the one thing that I had biggest problems with lockdown in the past was the fact that not every single match needed to be in the cage, but yet they had it in the cage. There was one year where they were doing the World X Cup, and you didn't really have a rivalry in there that determined for a steel cage, but hey, it's lockdown, so let's do a match in the cage. You didn't really have that tonight. Of course, the way they built the story with Eric Young and Bobby Roode, it deserved to be in the cage. And the match itself, I felt, was a really good one. Maybe not necessarily the blow-off to the feud, but definitely a good way of continuing on with it. And we'll see if they're going to go anywhere with this in the near future, or if they just have those two go in their own separate paths, or will Roode go more up against the BDC now, since Eric Young's kind of aligning with them, even though he's not part of them. So we'll see where they go with that. And then you had the two people from the British boot camps. You have Rockstar Spud and Manderson, basically continuing on Rockstar Spud's feud with EC3. And by having the handicap match with Tyrus. Obviously not a blow-off to this feud by any stretch of the imagination. And it did come off as a relatively decent handicap match. It wasn't absolutely horrible. They let let Manderson and Spud get some offense in. You let, obviously you have Tyrus going over as a big monster in this case, so it came off really well for this type of match, and what you really needed to see as continuing on through the actual feud between EC3 and Rockstar Spud. So we'll see where they go with that. I thought this was a good, again, a relatively good one. It wasn't bad by any stretch of the imagination. As a matter of fact, this entire show wasn't really that bad by any stretch of the imagination. Before going into the main event, they did have at least one other segment that pops into my head. They had Velvet Sky saying goodbye to Angelina Love, and you know, the one thing, even though it doesn't really add much to the Angelina Love character by any stretch, but was just her insincerity towards Velvet Sky leaving. It came off at least heelish. It came off decent, but it really doesn't add much to the character that of Angelina Love, basically because it kind of just sticks to her norm at this point in time. So it really didn't do much, but it was kind of necessary to put it in there. They also did a segment where they showed clips from Robbie E. and Brooke having a race through the cage. I'm kind of glad this probably didn't make the show, because it looked like it was relatively stupid. And I think the clips showed that in this case. And like I said, I'm glad the whole thing didn't really make the show, because, well, it probably would not have been received well. And that's just, again, my own personal opinion. And this brings into Lethal Lockdown, which is Team Angle versus the BDC, MVP's team. And throughout the entire night, they built it up as, you know, Bobby Lashley doesn't want to join up with Kurt Angle's team in any way, or, you know, and it was going to be a 4-on-3. They even did a relatively okay promo with the BDC inside of the cage, trying to offer each of the members of Team Angle to step out of the match, which of course wasn't going to happen. And, you know, Lethal Lockdown, they've done this one. I think they've overdone this, where it seems like one team comes off as being so underdogish, or they don't have all their team members yet at the last second they'll get their team member. And that's just how it seems to be. Seems to be every time they really want to do this match. It is getting a little old in that case, but it wasn't relatively bad in this particular case. It did come off at least decently well. I felt it almost was a little ho-hum when Lashley decided to come out there. It didn't really seem all that important. I did like the ending spot of the match with each of the team members. Like, you had Austin Aries put the last chancery in, you had Gunner with a torture rack, and Kurt Angle with the ankle lock, while Lashley spears MVP to get the victory. I thought that was a pretty cool spot to end the match. But overall, that match was kind of, it was basically your basic weapons match with inside of a cage. It wasn't anything overly special, but it wasn't anything really that bad. It was kind of just okay. So overall, I felt that TNA Impact this week was a relatively good show. In the overall sense, I felt they came off really well. The good thing about all the storylines, they were built well enough that warranted cage matches, which has always been the most poor thing about the Lockdown show in the past, was this whole aspect that every match is inside the steel cage, and the whole aspect behind the steel cage is almost like a rivalry ender, or it's supposed to be a brutal form in this feud to keep it going and where they were going to go in the end. And at least every match tonight warranted that cage, and that was the good thing about the show, and it came off really well. So overall, I would say the show was relatively good. I did not necessarily like how they finished some of the matches, just because of they came off a little bit awkward in a sense, like the Hardys and Gunner and not Gunner, but Storm and Abyss came off a little bit awkward. It didn't really come off all that good, at least in my own personal opinion. I mean, the whole match before that was relatively good. The spot after the match was extremely dangerous. Maybe not the best thing to see, but it came off, and it came off well, and it was a good way of writing Jeff Hardy off of the show for the time being. So yeah, that's my review this week for TNA Impact Wrestling, and I thank you guys for watching.